All right, man. Here we are, episode 25. We're back at it again, man. Still drinking that delicious bubbly. Gosh, man. Absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. All right, man. So we're going to get right into it for today. We're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite films that I think I've mentioned briefly before on the show, but I've never truly gone too much into. A film that I was able to see theatrically last night, and that is from one of my favorite filmmakers, Peter Weir, from 1975, Picnic at Hanging Rock, based on the novel by, what's her name? Joan Lindsay. That's what it was. A novel which I have read, and a film which I have always had a huge soft spot for. This is an interesting film because it's one that I had only ever seen one time, and that's all it took for it to become one of my very favorite films. It's a certain feeling and emotion that it gives off of a dreamlike quality that can only be done visually, I feel. And having read the novel as well, I get a similar reaction in sense of the mystery, I should say, but not going into the differences between the novel and the film because primarily the novel just expands on some information with some of the other characters back at the school, such as in the second half of the book, going more into the downfall of the school itself, following Mrs. Appleyard and Sarah. But the film itself, like I said, directed by Peter Weir. This was a famous Australian film set in the year 1900 about a group of girls on St. Valentine's Day who go out to this area at Hanging Rock. And there is the giant structure itself where a few of the girls go missing without a trace. They go up there, and from there, the rest of the film deals with the lives of the other characters that it affects. People who desperately want answers. Little pieces of evidence that may or may not come back. We also follow two of the male characters, one of which is actually a pretty well-known Australian actor, whose name I'm going to bring up here, who was in Wolf Creek, probably most famously, in terms of having a contemporary resurgence. Actor John Jarrett played Mick in both of the Wolf Creek films and in the show as well. And Wolf Creek, I think the first one, is a terrific film. Also a Australian film, very unnerving, but phenomenal film that I think was unfortunately a symptom of being grouped in with a lot of horror films of the time, where it is a brutal film and the violence is unflinching, but the film above its peers, even with other films of the time that I like. This is not a film like Hostel that I think was getting grouped into a certain kind of film. This is heavy on, the first half is very heavy on tension and uncomfortableness, and the second half is where the extremity comes in. That is a really terrific film, I believe. Wolf Creek 2, not so much. But he's in it as well with Dominic Guard. Dominic Guard's character and him, they see them go up, and since their disappearance have become infatuated with trying to solve it. And those are great characters as well because there's a lot of themes going on in the film, one of which being time. I think that's a big part of it. Not only the amount of time that they are gone and the amount of time they go up there, but also as time goes on, people, because there is no real lead, people maybe not necessarily don't care, but are at a certain point realize that a search for these girls is not too hopeful, and you can only spin your wheels so much, as they say. It reminds me of, there was a line in David Fincher's Zodiac where, not the exact line, but the idea is that, obviously based on the true unsolved crimes of the Zodiac killer, who had murdered a couple people. But there's a point in that film where so much time has passed, and Jake Gyllenhaal's character in that film is obsessed with still trying to find it. And another character puts things into context of just saying that there have been these bigger, worse events that have happened in that time frame. Why is he still obsessed with this one killer who, I shouldn't say only, but in the grand scheme of things, had a low kill count, which sounds awful to say, because each of those lives mattered, but in context of what has come since, and that character comes down to the not knowing of it. And I think that's something that might frustrate people with the film, because the film itself is not concerned with answering questions. While it will give you hints and may lead you into one direction or another, the film is, I think, more about the aftermath of it and less about the specific mystery of it all. Because interestingly enough, what both the film and the novel do is we follow the characters up it. So it is not as though they are, once they are up, they are away from the film. We follow them actually for quite a bit, and we see the end of them here into a disappearance, and whatever that is, you know, it's, I would say, up for interpretation, but I think in terms of the film, it does kind of lead towards something one way. Now, I think something important to keep in mind is that, so I've read the novel as well on the previous Criterion Blu-ray, which I don't know if it's still, this version is still in print, but it does come with the novel, which is one of their releases, such as Red River or The Furies, these films that come with their novel counterparts. And because I was such a fan of this film, I had to read it. And I don't primarily read fiction. I'm much more interested in nonfiction, but this was one that was pretty short and didn't take too long to read. It's about 200 pages, I think, if that. And the novel as well, it doesn't expand on it too much, but it is important to know that the writer, Joan Lindsay, had something of an explanation afterwards. Now, don't exactly quote me on this, but I believe that, and I won't say it, but I think it was something that was going to be in the novel originally, or something that was put out after. But the explanation is absolutely nonsense. I mean, it is truly like, I mean, in a weird way, I kind of would have liked to have seen it on screen, not in this film. Maybe you could pull a Russ Meyer and Valley of the Dolls, let him do the next one, because my gosh, man, it is truly insane what the explanation, quote unquote, the explanation is, and I don't quite, in context of the novel and the film, I don't quite believe that to be the explanation. It's very out there, to say the least. When I heard it for the first time, I thought it was a joke. It is completely insane, and in a bad way. But we are left with the film. I mean, this is a film that I had seen once and had left such a big impact on me, of just something that, there was one shot in particular of the film that I'll never forget, left such a specific emotion and feeling that I've rarely ever felt before in any kind of medium. And there's a shot in the film where the character, whose name I just, funny, I awful with character names and remembering these things, where Michael, played by Dominic Guard, is on his own and he has gone back to look for them, and he looks behind him at a cave opening, and sees Miranda, the main girl, played by Anne Louise Lambert, and she has her back turned and she looks back to him, and he looks down and looks back up, and she's gone. And that was one specific frame that, or one moment, I would say, that stuck with me in a way that could have only been conveyed visually with the emotion that it gave off, where I could read about it, where I don't even believe that, I don't remember if that was even in the novel or not. It's been a little while since I've read the novel, so I'm not going to pretend like I remember exactly what happened, but it's definitely a very unsettling, but at the same time hopeful feeling. Kind of this idea of the spirit still being there. There's some visual lead-ins with some swans in the film, and I there's a lot that you can look into that. And it's a film that's not really about spoiling, because I don't believe it's about that. It's more so about the lives that it affects and the experiences that are left with it, not necessarily an A, B, C plot, especially when you get into these, more so the third act, I would say, when you follow primarily two of the characters. You have Mrs. Appleyard, played by Rachel Roberts, and Sarah, played by Margaret Nelson, and the troubled relationship that is there, which is in the novel as well. But the novel, from what I can remember, focuses more on the downfall of the school after all this. And it's a film that it's hard to compare it to another film. Not that film should be compared, because for the most part, I think films should stand on their own. But the certain kind of feeling, I compare it to a film like Frank Perry's The Swimmer, which is one of my very favorite films. Which has that feeling of I don't want to say nightmare logic, because I think that's attributed to some genre films. I think I hear that primarily when people talk about the work of Lucio Fulci, where nightmare meaning a negative thing. I would say more so dream logic, because this is a feeling where when you're watching it, you're watching it through the characters, so when things aren't explained or things seem otherworldly, you're willing to go along with it more. The Swimmer especially, I think, you could say nightmare logic on that, but I don't believe that's the case for that. That's a film as well that is a very specific feeling that works for that film in a not quite nihilistic, but in a downbeat way, I believe. That's actually not one, no, that's hard to explain, but another similar film, I mean, would be, I think from '77, Peter Weir's The Last Wave. And even to a similar extent, because it came up when I was looking up on IMDb, and I didn't even think about it before, but also a good kind of feeling in a way is Nicholas Roeg's Walkabout. Another one of my favorite films, one of the best Australian films as well, with Jenny Agutter in that film. And that film, I think, the first act of that film the way it's edited has a specific feeling of more overt dream qualities, where the way that the film is edited and certain shots that it cuts to, I think, are more overt but work for that film, and the rest of that film is not quite as specific as that. The rest of the film feels like a dream, and it works in its own right, where you have three portions of that film, especially when you get to the third act of that film, or yeah, I would say the third act, when there's another location involved, that it really does its own thing. But Walkabout as well is a terrific film. Nicholas Roeg is a pretty well-known filmmaker. Don't Look Now is a real incredible film. But another film that I had seen not too long ago, also from Peter Weir, is probably The Plumber, which was a TV film, I guess, but that also as well has that same kind of feeling where it's this character who is just in this woman's house, and I think when I initially watched it, it was, you immediately try to look for logic in some of these things, where you try to look for why she's not kicking this guy out and why he's still showing up in this house that's getting gradually destroyed, kind of like The Last Wave in a way. And I think that's what Peter Weir does best, is that he is able to make these films that give off very evocative feelings that can only be done visually. Fearless as well, which is like Jeff Bridges' film with Rosie Perez and Isabella Rossellini, is a great film as well. It has a very memorable sequence at the beginning of a plane crash, and it's a thing where in that film Jeff Bridges' character is the only survivor in this plane crash, and after it happens, there are these great silent moments where he's just walking. He walks to his an ex-lover's house, and it feels almost like you're on a cloud or something like that. Like it's a feeling where you feel relaxed, but not in a way that is it's soothing, but you don't let your guard down, if that makes sense. His films are easier to be felt than explained, and that's why I think that's what he does so well, is that he's able to create these feelings that if you get it, you totally get it, and if not, then you may not ever, and that's not to say all the films are like that. I think the Truman Show as well is a film that it doesn't quite have that feeling, but is a great film in its own right. Actually, that made my top 10 of 1998 list, if you want to go back and listen to that video. And I haven't seen all of his films. Some of his bigger ones I haven't seen. A Dead Poet Society is probably his biggest, which I haven't seen. Master and Commander is one that I know a lot of people like. His most recent film was The Way Back from 2010, from 12 years ago. And, he has quite a lot under his belt, and I've only seen a couple of his films, but each of his films I've liked all of his films. Even The Plumber, which is probably my least favorite, I think is still really solid and really worth watching. Very short as well, only about an hour 17, I think. But Picnic at Hanging Rock is a film that I think everyone should see. It's very quiet. The flute soundtrack, very memorable. And when it has a harsher kind of feeling at times, like there's a great overhead shot from a helicopter of a character running, and the sound that hits there, it's very sharp, and it's very, I watched this late at night after I had seen a couple films theatrically that day, so I was feeling a little tired, but I think that's almost the perfect way to kind of watch this film, because you're surrendering to the screen, the vortex of cinema, and when the final narration happens and the credits come up, you're kind of left with the stunned feeling of just being put back into the real world, like you've just traveled to a different dimension in a way. It's a film that it's just, there's not much like it, man. That's why I compare it to films like Frank Perry's The Swimmer, is that you watch it and you don't forget the first time that you watched it. It's otherworldly in a way that only film can do, and that's why this film it's forever my favorite Australian film. I mean, it is funny how I look at this is a very this is a film, a big part of it is femininity. I mean, this is a primarily female cast, and then I look at another one of my very favorite Australian films, maybe even my second favorite, which is Wake and Fright, which is a primarily, I think almost exclusively a man in the film. It's a look at masculinity in a very destructive and ugly way, but also it's a brilliant film. Wake and Fright is just one of the best films I've ever seen. So it is funny looking at that contrast between these two films, and I haven't watched the miniseries of this that was put up by Amazon a couple years ago, and truthfully, I don't think I have a whole lot of interest in it. I don't. For one, miniseries are not really my thing. I think I just this is a film that I just kind of, I'm sure it's good, and I'm sure the miniseries does. I think it's more based on the novel than it is of being an adaptation of the previous film. But I just don't have very much interest, and if it's good, fine. But I'm good. And I think another kind of easy comparison to be made to this film, intentionally so, Sofia Coppola's The Virgin Suicides from 2000, I think, or 1999, one of the two, which is another fantastic film. Just got released re-released on Criterion in a 4K, which I've actually been thinking of upgrading, and I would love to get a 4K of this as well. But the Virgin Suicides as well has a similar kind of feeling. But that's a very obvious comparison, and Sofia Coppola has said that Picnic at a Hanging Rock was a influence on that. Obviously so if you watch the film, but both these films should be seen. Picnic at Hanging Rock as well has a Criterion Blu-ray. I've seen it in Barnes & Noble a couple times, and it does not include the novel with it, so I don't know if that version is out of print or you got to get it online. Not sure. But the novel is definitely worth reading as well. This was just a really terrific rewatch and really kind of solidified this being one of my very favorite films. And I have a big poster list next to my TV. So, yeah, just huge fan of this film. Big fan. Another film that I had seen theatrically that I haven't heard a whole lot of talk about, but I want to kind of put out there in case people are interested. It's a documentary that says it was from last year, but when you see some years on films that get theatrical releases, it's a little hard to kind of gauge. Not that it matters, but if I'm looking at year-end of the year-end lists, I don't know what to include. But that's a problem to deal with another day. A documentary from filmmaker Bianca Stichter. Sure, why not? This is who also worked with. You know what? That's what it was. I'm going to mention this a little bit. But in the credits of this film, by the way, the name of the film is 3 Minutes of Lengthening. And in the credits of this film, I saw producer Steve McQueen. And Steve McQueen is a contemporary filmmaker. He's made films like Hunger, Shame. And I see here on Bianca's IMDb that she was an associate producer on 2 of his films, 12 Years a Slave and Widows. Widows I still need to watch for 2018 because I have not seen that film. But that made sense. And I believe that this was restored at Steven Spielberg's effects department or something like that. This is a very fascinating film. This is analyzing this 3-minute piece of film from 1939 in this town in Poland, which would eventually be overtaken during World War II. It looks over a lot of the people. The film looks at the people, the Jewish people in the film, tries to answer questions like the names of the businesses around some of the people involved, who is still alive, who is there. I mean, they talk about the restoration process of this film, the 16mm film that was almost lost to time. They mentioned kind of the timely restoration of this, where they mentioned early on. I shall say this is narrated, which I didn't know when I was watching, by Helena Bonham Carter. We've been on a bunch of stuff, but I didn't even know it was her voice. But it's all the footage in this film is of the 3 minutes. So you watch it. It starts off. You watch the whole 3 minutes, and it's a lot of just kids waving at the camera. You see businesses and stuff, and the film tries to fill in a lot of the blanks, answer some of the questions, and it's endlessly fascinating. This is one of these films where I could compare it to something like They Shall Not Grow Old by Peter Jackson, also from 2018, which I need to rewatch, but a film that takes this in this case, one piece of film, or one stretch of film, whereas They Shall Not Grow Old is multiple, but tries to fill in the blank as to certain parts of it, tries to contextualize it for what would come afterwards. They mentioned that there's a prolonged narration of, which, I mean, the whole film is narrated, but specifically there's one part where they talk about what happened in the streets afterwards, which is just, I mean, it's horrific, to say the least, but just putting this footage in context of what would be to come later on, and a lot of the people what would happen to a lot of them, and the likelihood of the survival of a lot of them. It's a film where I think the importance maybe kind of overshadows the filmmaking part of it, because, not to say the filmmaking part of it isn't top notch, but I think this is one that should be seen by everyone, pretty much. It's a film and it's a very short film. It's an hour and 10 minutes. And it goes by at a pretty good pace, actually. And I just love these kind of, films that take, like They Shall Not Grow Old, that takes this old footage and puts it into context and looks at, they look at the certain times that it was filmed at. They do some great special effects where they do 3D models of the town, or a 3D model of the town. They do a, what's it called when you pan across to get one large image? They do that as well to kind of get the full frame of it. They mention some of the people, some of the people wearing hats and why they're wearing hats and stuff. It's a very educational film more so than entertaining, but you walk out of the theater kind of blessed to know that a piece of footage like this was saved that could have easily been lost to time. And I think a big part of the film that they emphasize a lot is to not lose these memories and to not let the memories of these people get lost to time. As you hear so many stories about how many films, and especially during World War II, how many pieces of art were just destroyed or just completely gone. I mean, how many silent films are just gone, are just completely, and how many films that we see now that were saved that could have been lost. I mean, look at, I don't know, films like Metropolis or The Passion of Joan of Arc, these films where it's kind of a miracle they're even here. And it's incredible, man. This is just, and it's great too, because I think if this had been longer, it would have maybe not overstayed its welcome, but I think because this is a narrated documentary, it is at a perfect runtime. It keeps you engaged, and it's endlessly fascinating. And this is one that I was not aware of before I sat in the cinema, but I was just completely blown away by the whole process of the film. So keep an eye out on this one if it's available. But I think that's going to probably wrap it up for that film talk as well. So that's what I have to say on that. I hope that everyone is working hard on what they need to work on. I got to say, an important thing that I think should be remembered is that going at your own pace and getting the work done the way that you feel it should be done, and to not compare yourselves to any of your peers. Because what I found is that in terms of writing, I have found that times I struggle to find the motivation. That's not the right word. I struggle to find the drive to theorize, to get these ideas where I will look and I have nothing. I have nothing to type out. There's nothing there. But then I'll come back to it, and just the other day, and then it all just flows out. And that feeling of just, well, I didn't do this today, and, I'm falling behind. And then you jump back and you have all this idea. It's easy to compare yourself to somebody else who is, you say, I want to be a great artist. I want to be a great painter. But look at what this person did. They did this great painting. Look at what Van Gogh did, Picasso. They're these great painters, and I can't. But that didn't happen overnight, man. They worked on their craft. They failed. And a line that I always remember from Ed Wood, 94, which is humorous in the context of the film, but is words to kind of live by, is after the release of, I think it was Glenn or Glenda. Pretty sure that was the one in context. That was the film it was one of the first ones they were making, but I don't remember if this was in the context of that. But Ed Wood gets a call, and he asks about what they thought of a film, and they said it was the worst film they ever saw. And he replies with, well, worst film you ever saw? Well, my next one will be better. And it's humorous in the context, but yeah, if you fail, you can only go up from there. With that said, much work is to be done. It's a beautiful day out. We are going to seize the day, and we are going to live life to the fullest and not waste it. Unless if you want to each their own. It is not my right to tell you how to live your life. I'm going to live my own. And I'm going to finish this delicious can of bubbly water. My gosh, man. This is truly phenomenal.